الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So last week then we got up to the section regarding the prostration, and it was talking about some of the descriptions of the prostration. And we got to the section where it said وَلَا يَفْرِشُ ذِرَاعَيْهِ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, that you don't put your forearms flat on the ground. When you're in prostration, the forearms are not flat on the ground. That is mentioned in the hadith in Al-Bukhari of Anas radiyallahu anhu, اعتدلوا في السجود ولا يبسط أحدكم ذراعيهم بساط الكلب. That be average in your prostration, not too long, not squashed up, in the average middle kind of position. And do not place your arms flat on the ground like a dog does. And also we mentioned last time وَلَا يَكُفُّ شَعْرَهُ وَلَا ثَوْبَهُ, that he is not supposed to tie up his hair or his garments during the prayer. Not to tie up the hair or to fold up the garments during the prayer. And that is mentioned also in Al-Bukhari, hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, أمرنا أن نسجد على سبعة أعظم ولا نكف ثوبا ولا شعرا, that we've been commanded to prostrate. We've been commanded to prostrate on 7 body parts, on 7 bones. Keeps going on mute. We've been commanded to prostrate on 7 body parts or 7 bones. وَلَا نَكُفَّ ثَوْبًا وَلَا شَعْرًا, and we are not to tie up or fold up our hair, our garments, nor our hair. So the hair is supposed to be opened and the garments are not supposed to be folded up. And with the women, some of the scholars, they do say also, if they are able, they should have their hair open. Obviously they have to cover it up. It has to be covered up, but if they are able to pray with it open, that is good. And if not, because they have to cover their heads with the head covering, etc., it may need some tying up of the hair, then so be it. وَلِمُسْلِمٍ أمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يسجد على 7 ونهي أن يكف شعره وثيابه. Same meaning, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم was commanded to prostrate on 7 parts and was prohibited from tying up the hair or folding up and tying up the garments. وَإِنْ طَالَ السُّجُودُ وَشَقَّ عَلَيْهِ رَفْعُ الْيَدَيْنِ جَازَ اعْتِمَادُهُ عَلَى رُكْبَتَيْهِ. روى أبو داود عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال اشتكى أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مشقة السجود عليهم إذا انفرجوا فقال استعينوا بالركب. So if the prostration is long, meaning it's a long prostration in how long you spend in the prostration. If it is a long prostration, then it mentions in the hadith that you can put your weight onto your knees. That you put your weight onto your knees so that your weight is further back rather than on your arms at the front if it's a long prostration. وَيُبَاشِرُ الْأَرْضَ حَالَ سُجُودِهِ وَلَوْ عَلَى مَاءٍ وَطِينٍ. And you have to touch the ground when you're prostrating, even if the ground is muddy or wet. Your contact points have to be on the ground. It's mentioned in the hadith of Abu Sa'id radiyallahu anhu. In the hadith of Abu Sa'id radiyallahu anhu في رؤيا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليلة القدر وإني رأيت كأني أسجد في طين وماء. That in the narration it says, it is as though I saw myself prostrating in mud and water. وكان سقف المسجد جريد النخل. And that is because the roof of the Prophet's mosque at that time, Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, the roof was made of palm, the palm strips that you get off the palm trees. Those strips that would come off the trunk of the palm tree, they were used at the top as the roof. And as a consequence, when it rained, that is obviously not waterproof. The rain water would fall through that. وَمَا نَرَى فِي السَّمَاءِ شَيْئًا فَجَاءَتْ قَزَعَةٌ فَأُمْطِرْنَا فَصَلَّى بِنَا النَّبِيُّ صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى رأيت أثر الطين والماء على جبهة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأرنبته تصديق رؤياه. It mentions in this hadith how it rained. There was a sudden rainfall that occurred, and so when they prayed and they prostrated, because the roof was only made of that bark from the palm trees on the roof, and so when the water came through, it would cause the ground to become wet. The ground would become wet because the ground of the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ground of the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mud, because it was the normal ground and there was no floor to that. There was no floor to it, and so when the water would come through, the ground would become muddy. So it mentions in the hadith that on that occasion when they prostrated, they saw the mud on the forehead of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They saw the mud on the forehead of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he came up from the prostration. And then it mentions also وَلَا يُمْسَحْ الْأَرْض إِلَّا لِحَاجَةٍ. That the ground is not wiped except if there is a need. It mentions in a hadith أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال في الرجل يسوي التراب حيث يسجد قال إن كنت فاعلا فواحدا. That where you're going to prostrate, the ground you're going to prostrate on, you don't fix that up in advance to prostrate on it. If it's outside and it's the normal ground, obviously on the carpets now there's nothing to do. But when they were prostrating, praying outside on the ground, then you pray as it is. You don't fix up the ground to pray on it. It mentions in this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said to somebody who was fixing up the area where he was going to prostrate, that if you're going to do that, then just the once. Just straighten it off once, maybe get rid of anything sharp or whatever. You straighten it off once and then you prostrate. But not that you continuously straighten all that out and fix all that in order to prostrate on it. It is also permissible to put something down, like a handkerchief or a cloth, You can put down a handkerchief or a cloth or something to prostrate onto that. And there are narrations in Al-Bukhari where the Prophet ﷺ did exactly that, placed down a cloth that was touching the ground, on the ground, to then prostrate on that. وَلَا يَسْجُدْ عَلَى مُتَّصِلٍ. So that is if it is something separate, a separate piece of cloth, you can put that down on the ground and you can prostrate on it. But you do not prostrate on something that is on you. So you don't get your garment, if it's a loose garment, and try and put that down and prostrate on it, or other parts of your garment to put that down and prostrate on it. That is only done if there is a need or a necessity. So you don't prostrate on your actual garments, you don't push them across when you go into prostration. But if you have a separate cloth that you put down, that is permissible. As for your garments, that is only in times of necessity, if you have to push something out from your garment to prostrate on it. That is mentioned in one hadith of Anas radiyallahu anhu in Sahih al-Bukhari. كنا نصلي مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيضع أحدنا طرف الثوب من شدة الحر في مكان السجود. He said that when we would pray with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one of us may extend out his thobe when he goes down into prostration to prostrate on it due to the severe heat. It was so hot that they couldn't touch the ground. So hot that you cannot touch the ground. And that is very possible and very understandable. When it's extremely hot at 50 degrees, then some of the ground, it is too difficult to touch with the bare skin. And so in those instances, they may push out some of their garment as they go down to prostrate on it. In another narration it says, فَإِذَا لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ أَحَدُنَا أَنْ يُمَكِّنَ وَجْهَهُ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ بَسَطَ ثَوْبَهُ فَسَجَدَ عَلَيْهِ. That if we were not capable of prostrating on our head to the ground, the skin could not touch the ground, too hot or other reason like that, then in that case it mentions we would extend our garment out in front of us as we went down to prostrate on that. Then, what do you actually say in the prostration? Al-hay'a al-qawliyyah, the actual statements that you say in prostration. يقول في سجوده, so you are supposed to say in the prostration, سبحان ربي الأعلى. يكررها ثلاثا أو أكثر كما يشاء. You can say that 3 times or more than 3, but 3 times is what it should be said, and beyond that you can say it as many times as you want, unless you are the Imam leading the prayer. If you are the Imam leading the prayer, you're not supposed to go beyond 10 times. If you are the Imam, then you're not supposed to say it more than 10 times. So that is the actual statement, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. And then there are other du'as as well that can be added on. There are different other du'as that can be said in the prostration. As an example, the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu that Al-Imam Muslim narrated, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يقول في سجوده اللهم اغفر لي ذنبي كله دقه وجله وأوله وآخره وعلانيته وسره. That he used to add on in his prostration, O Allah, forgive for me all of my sins. O Allah, forgive for me all of my sins, whether small or big, from the first of them to the last of them, whether apparent or hidden. Forgive for me all of my sins. the small ones and the large ones, the first of them to the last of them, those that are apparent and those that are hidden, then forgive for me all of those sins. And then after that, as we know as well, you are allowed to make your own dua in the prostration too. You can add on any additional dua as well for yourself that you want to make. And if you are not able to say it in Arabic, it is permissible to make your dua in English or whatever language too. When you're in the prostration, after you've done these du'as, you've said these statements, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, and these additional ones that you may know, then after that, you are allowed to make your own dua, and it is one of the best times to make dua in the prostration. And so you make dua at that time, and if you cannot do it in Arabic, there's some specific dua you want to make, then it's permissible to say it in English too. The Sheikh then says, a benefit to learn here, تسبيح الركوع يقول فيه الإنسان سبحان ربي العظيم. When you are in the ruku', we say سبحان ربي العظيم, and when you're in the prostration, we say سبحان ربي الأعلى. The difference between them, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, that Allah is free from imperfections, the great, the mighty, the majestic, and Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, that Allah who is free from all imperfections, al-A'la, the most high. Why are those du'as specifically in those two positions? It mentions al-ruku' inhina or inha lillah ta'ziman lahu. That when you bow, then the act of bowing is an act of showing or demonstrating the greatness of someone. That's why it is impermissible to bow to anybody else, to bow to the kings and the queens. It's impermissible to do that, haram. Because bowing to someone, it is an indication you are showing that you have great veneration for that person. You're showing your great level of respect for that person, raising that person, showing and demonstrating greatness for that person. So that is not permissible except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, the great and mighty, majestic, indicating that greatness of Allah is suitable in the bowing position. And as for the prostration, then the Sheikh mentions, when you prostrate, you put down the most honorable part of your body, which is your face. The most honorable part of your body, which is your face, you put that down onto the ground where people's feet have been walking. Down onto the ground where people's feet have been treading on. You put the most honorable part of your body, your face, down into that ground. And you do that to demonstrate your humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it shows that even though you are right down there, low on the ground, the lowest you can get, right down in prostration, yet our Lord is the Most High. So you say, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, the Most High. You are right now at the most lowest point you can get to, right down into the ground, your face in the ground. And yet the supplication you say at that moment, when you're right at the lowest you can get down on the ground, you say, but my Lord is the Most High. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, the Most High. And so that shows the subservience that we have as servants of Allah, that we are right down there with our heads in the dust where people walk, and yet then we say that our Lord is the Most High though. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. And also, when you are in prostration, It mentions in a hadith, أقرب ما يكون العبد من ربه وهو ساجد. The closest a person can be to his Lord is when he is in prostration. And that again is something which has a point to it, because Allah is above. Allah is above, the Most High, above the heavens. And when you go down to the ground, then logically in our minds, we are getting further away from Allah. Because Allah is above, and we're now going down. So technically you would think you are getting further away from Allah. But the reality is, when you go down there onto the ground, that is when a servant is the closest he can be to Allah. When you're in prostration. أقرب ما يكون العبد من ربه وهو ساجد. The closest a person can be to his Lord is when he is in prostration. So as Sheikh Uthaymeen says, look at the wisdom behind that. Allah is above, so you would think logically in your minds, to get closer to Allah you need to go up, and yet when you go the opposite, down, you are actually now closer to Allah than you were when you were standing up, because you have shown your humility and subservience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when going into that prostration. So that is a time, it is a time in the prostration to make the dua. It is an opportunity for dua, and it is one of the best times to make the dua when a person goes down into prostration. And that's why it is, as the Messenger said, that the servant is the closest to Allah when you are in prostration. The closest you can be to Allah is when you are down in prostration. So you say the du'as and then you make your own dua at that time, and that is one of the times where the dua is more likely to be answered, most likely to be answered, when you make the dua in prostration. Then, after you've done that prostration, you then come up from the prostration, and there is a sitting, a brief sitting, before you then go down into the next prostration. So that is the section we're on right now then. You've gone into prostration, you say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la and the other dua that was mentioned there, and then you can make your own dua. Then you raise your head up from the prostration, and as you do so, you say Allahu Akbar. But do you raise your hands at this one or not? The majority of the scholars, they mention you do not raise your hands on that one. And there are some fiqh opinions about doing so. But as Sheikh Uthaymeen says, you do not raise your hands as you're coming out of the prostration. And that is what the majority of them have mentioned. You simply say Allahu Akbar, and you come out of that prostration, and then you sit. It is mentioned in the hadith of al-Bukhari, hadith of Abu Hurairah, ثم يكبر حين يسجد ثم يكبر حين يرفع رأسه. That he used to say the takbir, Allahu Akbar, going into prostration, and he would say the takbir, Allahu Akbar, coming out of prostration. And also in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma, he mentioned, وَلَا يَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ حِينَ يَسْجُدُ وَلَا حِينَ يَرْفَعُ رَأْسَهُ مِنَ السُّجُودِ. That the Messenger never used to raise his hands when saying the takbir to go into the prostration, nor did he raise his hands when saying the takbir to come out of the prostration. In another hadith of al-Bara, وكان ركوع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وسجوده وإذا رفع رأسه من الركوع وبين سجدتين قريبا من السواء. That when he used to raise his head out of the ruku' and raise his head out of the sujood, it was in that same manner, in the same position. So then now when you are sitting, you've done your first prostration, Allahu Akbar, and you're now sitting. You're going to do your next prostration in a second, but now you're in that sitting position. How is that sitting position to be done? Firstly, يفترش قدمه اليسرى أي يجعل الرجل اليسرى فراشا له. That your left foot, it is flat on the ground, laid down flat on the ground. Your left foot under your body, flat on the ground. And as for the right foot, ينصب القدم اليمنى من الجانب الأيمن لا الساق والفخذ بل الساق والفخذ ممدودتان. Your shin and your thigh are going to be in the normal position as you sit, but your right foot is going to be propped up. The right foot is propped up. The left foot is laid flat. Thirdly, يجعل بطون أصابعها إلى الأرض وعقبها إلى فوق. أما اليسرى فيكون ظاهرها إلى الأرض وبطنها إلى الإنسان. The right foot, the bottoms of the toes, they are going to be facing forwards, propped up on them. Facing forwards, propped up on those toes. And the back of the foot is going to be propped up and visible. The right foot is propped up. And as for the left one, that is laid down, that is flat laid down, touching the ground, and you basically are sitting on that left one. وروى البخاري عن عبد الله ابن عمر أنه كان يرى عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما يتربع في الصلاة إذا جلس ففعلته وأنا يومئذ حديث السن فنهاني عبد الله بن عمر وقال إنما سنة الصلاة أن تنصب رجلك اليمنى وتثني اليسرى فقلت إنك تفعل ذلك قال إن رجلي لا تحملاني. There is a narration about how Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma used to sit down in that prostration without propping up his right foot. So his right foot was just flat down as well. He never propped up his right foot. So it mentions in this hadith how the narrator one day saw that and he did it as well. But then Abdullah ibn Umar told him, don't do that. He said, but I saw you do it. You didn't prop up the right foot. They were both just flat. He said, no, that is only because my body, maybe this was when he was older in age, my body can no longer hold up my weight on the right foot. It is too difficult to do that position with the right foot and that kind of weight on the right foot in that way. Not able to do that. For that reason, it is laid out flat. So this would indicate that a person doesn't do that unless there is a need. He's unable to prop up the right foot, then he could lay both of them down flat. In the hadith, in another narration it mentions وَإِنْ شَاءَ أَقَعَ فَنَصَبَ قَدَمَيْهِ وَجَلَسَ عَلَى عَقِبَيْهِ. There is another way of doing it as well. In that sitting between the two prostrations, you can sit on your heels. So you kind of prop up both of your feet. When you're sitting in that position at the back, you prop up both of your feet and sit on your heels. You can sit on your heels. Both of your feet are together in the same physical position and the heels are up towards you and you sit on the heels. That is a position which is also possible. It's mentioned in the hadith قلنا لابن عباس في الإقعاء على القدمين فقال هي سنة فقلنا له إنا لنراه جفاء بالرجل فقال ابن عباس بل هي سنة نبيك صلى الله عليه وسلم. So they asked Ibn Abbas about doing that, like putting both of the heels of the feet up together, one of them not propped up and the other one flat, both of them together in the same way, heels up at the top, and you're sitting on those heels. They asked Ibn Abbas about that. And they said, but we feel like that's not really appropriate. And he said to them, no, that is a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning it's okay, it's appropriate, you can do that. You can put them both together in that way with the heels upwards and you're sitting on those heels. And that is one possible way of doing it, as opposed to the propping up the right foot and laying the left one flat. So that is the positioning of the feet at the back. And then يضع كفه اليسرى مضمومة الأصابع ممدودة على فخذه اليسرى وإن شاء ألقمها الركبة كالقابض لها. Then the left hand, it goes onto your left thigh, towards the end of your left thigh. And if you want, you can actually go further forward and put your hand onto your knee. So either just before the knee, the hand goes on the thigh, or it can be just further and your hand is actually on the knee. On the knee, or just before that on the thigh. That's with the left hand. As for the right hand, يضع كفه اليمنى على فخذه اليمنى أو طرف الركبة ويقبض منها الأصابع الثلاثة. The right hand, same thing. You can either put it at the end of the thigh, just before the knee, or it can be just onto the edge of the knee, going onto the knee itself. And then there is a certain way to hold the fingers. In the sitting between the two prostrations, some of the scholars, they say you don't do anything with your right hand, it's exactly the same as your left hand. Just flat on the thigh or just onto the knees. It's usually at the end where you have the position with your finger. But here some of the scholars do say, even in that sitting between the two prostrations, you make that position with your finger. And that's what the Sheikh is going to talk about now, how to make that position with the finger. He says, يَقْبِضُ مِنْهَا الْأَصَابِعَ الثَّلَاثَ الْخِنْصَرُ وَالْبِنْصَرُ وَالْوُسْطَى. The three fingers, the smallest finger, the one next to it, and the one next to it, those three, they are grasped, they are held together. You make a fist out of those three fingers, the three from the smallest going up. Those three are made into a fist. And then وحلق الإبهام مع الوسطى. And then you make a circle with the thumb and the middle finger. A circle is made with the thumb and the middle finger. فوصل رأسها برأسها كالحلقة. And so the middle finger to the thumb, they are joined together. The middle finger to the thumb, they are joined together into a circle. And the index finger is raised up. The index finger is then raised up. The others are joined together, the small two are held together. The middle and the thumb is made a circle. And the index finger is held up. That is one way of doing it. Two small ones held, middle finger, thumb together, index finger up. That is one method of doing it. And some of the scholars do mention that there is another method, which is that the three small ones are just grasped. The three small ones are just grasped, and the thumb just comes on, and then this goes on top, without a circle. But here the Sheikh mentions the circle. This is common and popular, and what is mentioned in the narrations about making a circle and then lifting the index finger. And then there is the issue of whether you are supposed to move the finger or keep it still. Whether you are supposed to move the finger or keep it still. That is, of course, one of the issues where there is a difference of opinion between the scholars. as to whether you are supposed to move it or keep it still, or if you're supposed to move it throughout the tashahhud at the end or only at certain parts. So there are some scholars like Sheikh Uthaymeen, they say you only move it, you keep it still, and you only move it at the parts when you're doing the dua. Like at the end when you're reading at-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibatu, there are certain sections as you go along that are like du'as. When you get to those dua sections, you move your finger. And the rest of it, which is normal again, you keep your finger still. When you get to a section which is a dua, move it again. So Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen says you only move it at the dua sections. There are other scholars who say you consistently move it. If you're in that final tashahhud, when you're in your final tashahhud, now we're at the sitting between the two prostrations where most scholars say you don't do any of this. This is only in the final tashahhud, where you make that movement throughout the final tashahhud. And some scholars, they say you don't make any movement at all. It is just kept still. So we'll come into a bit more detail on that difference of opinion when we get to the final tashahhud. But right now we're still in the sitting between the two prostrations. And in this sitting between the two prostrations, then you say, Rabbi ghfirli. And that is said twice, Rabbi ghfirli, Rabbi ghfirli. And you can add on, Warhamni, Rabbi ghfirli, Warhamni. Oh Allah, forgive me and have mercy on me. So, Rabbi ghfirli twice, that is the minimum that should be said in the sitting between the two prostrations. It's mentioned in a hadith about all of this, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا جلس في الصلاة وضع يديه على ركبتيه ورفع إصبعه اليمنى التي تلي الإبهام فدعا بها ويده اليسرى على ركبته باسطها عليها. So when the Prophet ﷺ sat in the prayer, he would put his right hand on he would put his hands on his knees, and he would raise the fingers of his right hand that are next to he would raise his finger on his right hand that is next to his thumb, meaning the index finger, and then he would make dua with it, meaning he would move it, making the dua. That's what some of the scholars understand from that. And his left hand would just be on his knee, stretched out or spread out, not together, but spread slightly on his knee. So there are a few narrations about doing that. And like we said though, many of the scholars, they say in the sitting between the two prostrations, you don't do any of that. It is simply both hands on both knees. But on the final sitting, when you're doing the tashahhud, that's where all of these parts are then done. We'll come to them again when we get to the final sitting section. So, Sheikh Al-Uthaymeen says, وَتَقْيِيدُ ذَلِكَ فِي التَّشَهُّدِ لَا يَعْنِي أَنَّهُ لَا يَعُمُّ جَمِيعَ الصَّلَاةِ لأن الراجح من أقوال الأصوليين أنه إذا ذكر العموم ثم أحد أفراده بحكم يطابقه فإن ذلك لا يقتضي التخصيص كما نص على هذا أهل الأصول. So here the Sheikh is going through his opinion that the movement or the finger being raised, that is done in between the two prostrations as well. The common opinion is you don't do it there. You come out of the first prostration, your hands are just on your knees. And then you go into the second prostration, you only do the finger thing at the last part when you're in the tashahhud, either in the middle tashahhud or the last tashahhud. But the Shaykh says no, the evidences seem to indicate, he says, based upon the principles, that there's no distinction. How are you going to distinguish that? Like we said before, there are only certain types of positions in the prayer. The position of sitting is where you do that with your finger in between the two prostrations. You are in the position of sitting. So the Sheikh, according to him, he says that even in that position you are supposed to do that. But many of the scholars, they say in that position you do not raise the finger. In that position it is simply both hands placed down on the knees. Sheikh Uthaymeen says, I used to say, Sheikh Uthaymeen says, I used to say, لَقَدْ كُنْتُ أَقُولُ إِنَّ جَلَسَاتِ الصَّلَاةِ ثَلَاث. He said, I used to say that there are three types of sitting in the prayer. بَيْنَ السَّجْدَتَيْن, in between the two prostrations, that is one sitting. وَفِي التَّشَهُّدِ الْأَوَّلِ, in the first tashahhud, if the prayer has more than 2 raka'at, like Maghrib or Isha or Asr or Dhuhr, then you have the first tashahhud and you have the second tashahhud. So the first tashahhud is a type of sitting and the second tashahhud is a type of sitting, and in between the prostrations is a type of sitting. 3 positions when you are sitting in the prayer. And the Sheikh says, I used to say, كُلُّ جِلْسَةٍ تَخْتَلِفُ عَنِ الْأُخْرَى. Every one of those sitting positions is different to the other one. The rulings on each one of those 3 are different to each other. التشهد الأخير يختلف عن التشهد الأول في أنه تورك. An example, the last tashahhud is different to the first tashahhud because of the way you sit. We're going to get to that later on. In the last tashahhud, there's a different way of sitting, where you're supposed to put your leg under your body and then prop up your right leg. There's a slightly different way of sitting compared to how you sit in the first tashahhud. So they are different, and we'll get to that when we come to it soon, inshallah. And also, الجلسة بين سجدتين توافق التشهد الأول في أنها افتراش، لكن تختلف عنه بأن وضع اليمنى على الفخذ مبسوطة كاليسرى. As for the sitting between the 2 prostrations, it is the same as the sitting in the first tashahhud, with the only difference being what you do with your right hand. In the first tashahhud, with your right hand, you do the finger movement, the finger position, whereas in the sitting between the 2 prostrations, you don't. The hands are just flat on the knees. As Sheikh Uthaymeen says, that's what I used to say, which is what the majority or many of the scholars say now. In the sitting between the 2 prostrations, the hands are just flat. You only do this in the tashahhud parts. He says, that's what I used to say. But then he says, لكني, however, بعد أن اطلعت على ما رواه وائل بن حجر رضي الله عنه لم يسعني إلا أن أتبع ما دل عليه الحديث. He said, when I came across the hadith of Wa'il ibn Hujr, he said, after I came across that hadith, then I had to follow that evidence. And I could no longer make the distinction between that sitting between the 2 prostrations and the first tashahhud. حتى وإن كان تعليل الأول الذي كنت أميل إليه وأقول به تعليلا جيدا، لكن ما دامت السنة دلت على أن وضع اليد اليمنى في الجلسة بين السجدتين وفي التشهدين سواء لا يسعني عند الله إلا أن أقول بذلك. He said, I used to say that in the sitting between the 2 prostrations, the hands are just flat. But he said, when I came across this hadith, there is a hadith that seems to indicate that your sitting in between the 2 prostrations is the same as your sitting in the tashahhud, which would mean that you do this with your finger. He said, when I came across that narration, then what can I do? I have to follow that narration. I'm going to follow the sunnah. He says that indicates to me that even in the prostration between the sitting between the 2 prostrations, you do that with your finger. That is the opinion of Sheikh Uthaymeen. Of course, many of the scholars, they do not have that opinion. Many of the other scholars, they say you simply put your hands down on your knees. And so you say, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي. At the minimum, you say, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي. And there is a lot more you can add on to that. You can say, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَارْحَمْنِي وَاهْدِنِي وَاجْبُرْنِي وَعَافِنِي وَارْزُقْنِي. That, oh my Lord, forgive me and have mercy on me and guide me and compensate for me and give me good health and give me sustenance. You can add on all of that. رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَارْحَمْنِي وَاهْدِنِي وَأَجْبُرْنِي وَعَافِنِي وَارْزُقْنِي. All of those. اغفر لي first, then ارحمني, then اهدني, then اجبرني, then عافني, then ارزقني. So all of those can be said whether you're the imam, whether you're being led in the prayer, whether you're praying by yourself, but the minimum is to say رب اغفر لي, رب اغفر لي twice. فإن قلت كيف يفرد الإمام الضمير وقد روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So now then, if you're the imam, there's one possible complication. If you're the imam leading the prayer, there is a hadith that says, لا يؤمن أحدكم فيخص نفسه بالدعاء دونهم أو لا يؤمن أحدكم فيخص نفسه بالدعاء دونهم فمن فعل فقد خانهم. That when you are leading the prayer, if you are the imam leading the prayer, then you should not make your dua specific to yourself. If you're the imam with these people behind you, then you should not make the dua only specific to yourself, because then you have betrayed them. You're the imam of these people behind you. You should make the dua in the plural form to encompass them all as well, and you should not make it in the singular. That's why, for example, in Taraweeh, when you have the witr at the end and they do the dua at the end, it's all done in the plural form. Allahumma innaka afuun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anna. Oh Allah, you are the one who forgives or pardons and you love to pardon, so pardon us. That's how the imam makes the dua. He doesn't say fa'fu anni, so pardon me. The dua has to be in the plural. He's the imam leading everyone. So now the complication arises with this dua here. It's in the singular form. The first person, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي. The dua here is in the singular form, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي. Oh Allah, forgive me. But the imam is supposed to make his du'as in the plural form. And so, how do we clarify this? The answer is أن هذا في دعاء يؤمن عليه المأموم. That this only refers to the du'as that the imam makes where the followers, the congregation, say Ameen to. As for that one between the two prostrations, then the congregation don't say Ameen to that. The imam says it to himself. Rabbi ighfirli, Rabbi ighfirli. Nobody says Ameen to that dua. So that is correct for the imam to say Rabbi ighfirli and to make that dua for himself. But as for the qunut, when we in the Taraweeh, for example, in the witr prayer, then you don't say Allahumma hdini fi man hadayt. You say Allahumma hdina fi man hadayt. Oh Allah, guide us. That is always then done in the plural form. So, Rabbi ighfirli, that is the minimum mentioned in the hadith of Hudhayfa radiyallahu anhu, that the Prophet used to say, Rabbi ighfirli, Rabbi ighfirli. And Ibn Abbas mentioned, Rabbi ighfirli, warhamni, warfa'ni, warzuqni, wahdini. And in one version, wajburni. Oh my Lord, forgive me and have mercy on me and raise me and give me sustenance and guide me. And in one version, wajburni. Wajburni means compensate me for any loss or whatever it may be. Compensate me or comfort me in that. That is wajburni. So, and also to compensate for my own shortcomings. Wajburni, compensate or help to compensate for any shortcomings that I have fallen into. So all of those extra words can be said in that section in between the two prostrations. When you say Rabbi ghfirli, Rabbi ghfirli. So then after you've done that, you do the takbir again, Allahu Akbar, and go down into the second prostration. But before going down into the second prostration, what is necessary and what is required is that a person must be settled in the sitting position. You say Allahu Akbar and come out of the prostration, you must now sit and be settled in that position. Then you say Allahu Akbar and go down into the second prostration. Not like people do now, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Up and then straight down. You're supposed to come up, Allahu Akbar, stay for a moment. Stay for a moment, settle yourself. Rabbi ghfirli, at least. Then go down. Not as people do, Allahu Akbar, up and then straight down. There is a position there to stop and to sit between the two prostrations and to settle yourself in that position before moving down into the second prostration. And that is in a hadith of Abu Hurairah in Sahih al-Bukhari. ثم اسجد حتى تطمئن ساجدا ثم ارفع حتى تطمئن جالسا ثم اسجد حتى تطمئن ساجدا. And it's for all of the positions. It says when you prostrate, then you're supposed to stay in that prostration until your body is settled, not down and up straight away. Go into prostration and settle your body into the position. Then Allahu Akbar, settle your body into the sitting. Then Allahu Akbar, settle your body into that position. If your body doesn't settle into the position, you go in and move out straight away. It's like a continuous movement. That's wrong. It is not a continuous movement in and out. It is a movement going in, then a pause. Settle yourself in the position. Then it's a movement to come out. Not up and down, straight up and down as the people they do. So that is important to remember, that settled position, that pause in each position is needed. When you come out of the ruku', Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd, you are supposed to stop and pause in that standing position. To settle yourself in that position, then Allahu Akbar and go down. Not as the people do, they barely even come up, not even straight, and go straight down into prostration again. Tuma'nina is something very important in the prayer, to settle into each position before moving on to the next position. That brings us to the end of the first raka'ah. And so the next section here then explains what you do in your second raka'ah, which is of course going to be a repeat of the first raka'ah. And then after that it will go on to what you do in the final sitting, or the tashahhud, the first and then the last, and what you read there and how you sit there. So that is what we'll begin with from next time, inshaAllah ta'ala. We'll begin with that from next time, the second raka'ah of the prayer, and we'll stop on that for today then. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Any questions or anything to add?
So, while we know that I think it's 3 or 4 days for the maximum time that someone will be considered a traveller to stay in one place, like beyond that it would be considered a resident. But then I've heard some people who say, like insist that it's 15 days because of what they've been raised upon. Is there any basis for that opinion?
There are multiple opinions about traveling and how many days you can be considered a traveler. There is the opinion of 4 days, that if you go somewhere, firstly there is an opinion that traveling is only the act of traveling. So if you go from here to London, for example, and you're going to stay in London for a few days, the first day when you travel down there, you are a traveler. When you get there, you get to your hotel, you get to where you're going to stay, you're not traveling anymore. You're resident, you're there, you're relaxing now, you're in your hotel or whatever. And then on the day back, a few days later, when you're going to head back, on the day you're heading back, you are a traveler again. But that's the concept of being a traveler when you're in the action of traveling. But still, if you are there, there are opinions about how long you can be considered a traveler when you go somewhere. One opinion, like a Sheikh al-Fawzan these days, he takes the opinion that it is 4 days only. That if you go somewhere and you're going to stay there for more than 4 days, then you are not considered a traveler when you get there. So imagine we're going to go from here to London, or you're going to another country. The day of travel, you're traveling. The process of traveling, you're traveling. From here to London, those few hours, you're traveling. From here to the other country, when you're flying, airports, whatever, you're traveling. But if you're going to stay there, like in London or the foreign country, you're going to stay there for 6 days, 1 week. Then you're going to fly back. So you're there for more than 4 days. According to a Sheikh al-Fawzan, you're not a traveler then. When you get there, when you actually get there, you get to your hotel or where you're going to stay, and you're now going to stay there for 6 days or 7 days, a week basically, more than 4 days anyway, then you're not a traveler. You consider yourself a resident when you're there. Go to the mosque and pray the normal prayers and don't combine or shorten. One opinion says 4 days. There are other opinions of 13 days, 15 days. There are multiple narrations. A lot of them are based upon the Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ and how many days he traveled and how long he's considered a traveler. There are lots of opinions about that. There is even an opinion that you are a traveler so long as you are out of your home. So if you go abroad and you're abroad for 2 months for work or whatever it is, there is an opinion. You're a traveler for the 2 months until you come back. That is not an opinion that many scholars implement, but it exists. But the opinion of the 4 days of a Sheikh al-Fawzan seems to be a good opinion, and the other opinions of those kinds of days are good opinions. There is an opinion also that when you travel somewhere, the process of traveling, of course, combine and shorten. So if you're going from here abroad, you're going to some country abroad, so you go to the airport, it's a 6-7 hour flight, 8-9 hour flight, and then you get there, then you got to go to your hotel. Maybe it takes 12 hours, the whole process. That 12 hours, you're a traveler. Any prayers come in during that 12 hours, shorten and combine. But once you get to your hotel, and you're going to be there for, let's say, 10 days. So technically now, upon some of these opinions, you're not a traveler. But on some of them, you still are. One of the opinions some scholars they give is that in that circumstance, you can shorten your prayer, but don't combine it. That is an opinion. So you're going to be there for 10 days. You're flying out from here to Dubai or something. And you're going to be there for 10 days. The day you travel, you're on your flight and everything, shorten, combine. But then the next 9 days when you're actually there, you can shorten the prayers. The Dhuhr you can pray it as 2, Asr pray it as 2, Maghrib 3, Isha 2, Fajr 2, but don't combine any of the prayers. So you still get some of the license, but not the full license. The full license would be shorten and combine the prayers. But halfway is that you can shorten the prayers, but don't combine them. Pray each one in its time, but you can shorten because you are technically still a traveler. You're away from home. So that is an opinion too. So there's multiple opinions on the issue of traveling.
Can I just ask, continue that, is shortening and combining, is that something you have to do? Or is that,
Yeah, according to some scholars, when you're traveling, you have to shorten and combine. That's not it's not an option. Some of the scholars, they do mention that. When you're a traveler, you're in the actual ruling of a traveler, then you shouldn't pray your full prayer. You should pray the shortened prayer when you're actually under the ruling of being a traveler. And so you shouldn't pray the nafil prayers or the sunnah prayers. The traveler doesn't pray the sunnah prayers and the nafil prayers that go with the prayers, that go with the obligatory prayers. You should pray as a traveler if you're a traveler. That is an opinion, yes. If you pray a full prayer, it's valid. But you shouldn't, according to many scholars. Anybody else?
Is there an exception to that if you're praying congregation?
Yeah, if you're in the congregation, then you pray full. If you are a traveler, in the ruling of a traveler, but you just happen to be walking past a mosque or you walk into a mosque to pray and suddenly you realize it's iqamah. They're about to do their jama'ah. So now they've just done their adhan, just done their iqamah, and you just walked in, you're a traveler. You can't just go into the corner. You shouldn't just go into the corner and pray your two or whatever and walk off. Iqamah's done, jama'ah is about to start, you have to join. So you join them and you have to pray full. They are praying their full prayer. The normal imam is there. He's not a traveler. They are the residents. If you pray behind a resident imam, you pray your full prayer. You don't shorten it. Even if you come in late, you're traveling somewhere, you go into a mosque, dhuhr prayer, but you were late and you got in just as they're getting up from their tashahhud. So they're about to start their third rak'ah. So you think to yourself, I'm a traveler. Excellent. I'll just make my intention for two. And Imam is just getting up from his tashahhud, so there's only 2 rak'at left of their prayer. Perfect, matches up. And I'll do my salam at the end with them. You're not supposed to do that. The Imam is a resident Imam who is praying the resident's prayer of 4 rak'at of dhuhr. You're supposed to join in with that Imam with that resident's prayer. So you still make intention for 4. And then you do get up and pray 2 more afterwards. But that is only because you've joined in with the resident Imam. The rulings for you are the rulings of the resident Imam.
You know, obviously in the West we've got these multi-faith rooms. If you go to one and there's no other symbols of other religion, it's just a room with a musalla, but there's copies of the Bible there. Is it permissible to pray?
Yeah, it's permissible. If there's no symbols, they don't have the Mary and Jesus statue things and cross and Buddhas and other things. They don't have any of these things there. It's just a plain room, just a room that's allocated to pray in, called the prayer room. They may have copies of other books and things in there, but you can pray in that room. The ones you can't pray in are these multi-faith rooms where they have Jesus and a cross and all types of things. All the symbols of the religion are in there. You're not supposed to pray in that kind of room. All right, we'll stop on that for this week then. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we'll continue next week. I think apologies to those who are following on Telegram. There were a few breakages with the connection, but the recording will be up afterwards and the Twitter recording will be there as well, insha'Allah ta'ala, which is complete. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.